africaine, Excellence Madame la Présidente de la Chambre des députés, Honorable Madame la Vice-Présidente de la Chambre des députés, Honorables membres du Comité exécutif de l'Union parlementaire africaine, Mesdames et Messieurs, bonjour. Comme vous l'avez vu au programme du travail de la deuxième journée de la 77e session du Comité exécutif de l'Union parlementaire africaine, aujourd'hui c'est la journée dédiée au pays hôte qui est le Rwanda. Nous avons aujourd'hui 4 panélistes. Ici présent, il y a 2 panélistes et je pense que les autres aussi vont venir. Et la modératrice d'aujourd'hui est l'honorable vice-présidente de la Chambre des députés. Comme vous l'avez vu aussi sur le programme d'aujourd'hui, après cette session de panélistes, on aura à 16 heures la séance plénière avec l'examen et adoption du rapport de la 77e session du comité exécutif et clôture des travaux de la 77e session du comité exécutif. Pour le moment, je donne la parole à la modératrice d'aujourd'hui, qui est l'honorable vice-présidente de la Chambre des députés. À vous la parole, honorable.
Merci, honorable modératrice. Maître de cérémonie, plutôt. Bonjour, Excellence, le président de l'Union parlementaire africaine, Excellence, Madame la présidente de la Chambre des députés du Rwanda, honorables délégués, nous avons le plaisir de vous présenter un panel, comme vous le voyez, de 4 personnes. La ministre du Commerce va bientôt arriver, mais on a déjà 4 sujets à traiter et je pense que ça va vous plaire. Vous allez m'excuser de changer de langue. We are going to discuss 4 topics. One is Rwanda's experiences in the reconstruction 20 years after the genocide against Tutsi and best practices in terms of leadership, good governance and reconciliation process. Another topic is the global response to COVID-19 pandemic, public health response and healthcare impact. And the third one is COVID-19 economic impact and recovery process. And we have also a topic or a presentation on fostering implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area for Africa's economic transformation. Rwanda, a country that has been devastated by the genocide against Tutsi in 1994, a country that could have been a failed state in 1994, but today it is a country that has chosen to be a country of transformation. As we know, transformation is not an event, it is a journey that is designed to achieve high impact at 2 levels, individual and organizational. Against all odds, Rwanda embarked on a journey of reconstruction, development, and more recently, socio-economic transformation. To take on this daunting task, both the leadership of Rwanda and its citizens came together and tapped into their most valuable and resilient asset, their shared national culture, to deal with the challenges they were facing using homegrown solutions. It is in the same spirit that Rwanda managed the crisis due to COVID-19 pandemic. The same spirit brought Rwanda to believe that a single market on the African continent is possible. This panel is going to help us to understand all this journey and how this became possible. As I said, the first presentation is going to be done by Dr. Usta Kayitesi. Dr. Usta Kayitesi is the Chief Executive Officer of the Rwanda Governance Board, RGB. She is a commissioner in the Rwanda Law Reform Commission. Dr. Kayitesi previously served as the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the RGB, the principal of the College of Arts and Social Sciences of the University of Rwanda, and served in different capacities at the UR Law School. She was the Vice Chairperson of the Technical Support Commission to the Parliament of Rwanda for the review of the Constitution of the Republic of Rwanda in 2015. Dr. Kayitesi was a member of the Rwanda Bar Association and the East African Law Society. She holds a PhD in law from the University of Utrecht, the Netherlands, a Master of Laws from the University of Ottawa, Canada, and a bachelor's degree from the then National University of Rwanda. Dr. Kayitesi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, the Honorable President of the Executive of UPA, Honorable members of Parliament from different countries, the Honorable Moderator. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about Rwanda's governance journey and how the past 28 years have been as a process of national reconstruction. You highlighted that the country was in shambles post-genocide. Life expectancy was below 30 years. 80% of the country depended on aid above 80%. 78% of the population lived in abject poverty. And of course, over 80% of all Rwandans were either refugees or internally displaced, or were internally displaced. As you mentioned, strategically, choices had to be made. I will quote the President of the Republic. When we were doing the 20th commemoration, he highlighted that after 1994, everything was a priority. And our people were completely broken, but we made the fundamental choices that guide us to this day. And it's those fundamental choices that are going to really guide my discussion. He highlighted that we made a choice to stay united. So we chose to be together as a people and as a nation. We made a choice to be accountable to ourselves, and we made a choice to think big, both politically, think big socially, and think big economically. And I will go through those choices in a way that they reflect, what has formed Rwanda today. So when we made a choice to stay together, there are certain approaches that were made. First, of course, the primacy of security has always driven this country. When we are secure, we can afford the pursuit of the other ambitions that we have. And secondly, we chose a democratic approach that is consensual in character. We are a pluralistic, consensual democracy, which means that we have different opinions on doing politics in this country, but we always find space and time to share those pluralistic ideas, to find a consensus that informs our delivery. We also have chosen power sharing as a mode of governance. And in power sharing, by the Constitution, it gives us the opportunity and space to be inclusive. Inclusive in that political organizations have an opportunity to be in government decision-making structures. There is a clear demarcation. For example, the President of the Republic cannot come from the same political organization with the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, and the purpose and intention is to allow that power sharing space. The President of the Republic is not allowed by the Constitution to exceed 50% of members of cabinet, even when he has above 80% of members of the parliament. And the purpose intention of that is to be inclusive. I also want to speak a little bit about inclusiveness. The parliament that we are seated in here today, by nature of the Constitution, has representatives of women, representatives of youth, representatives of the academia, when you go to the Senate, representatives of people with disability as well, and that is a choice that was intended to deal with the past of discrimination and allow the space of inclusion. As I said earlier, we have opted for consensus building other than confrontational politics. And this finds a lot of strength in that. And I'll give examples of those consensus building approaches. So in the year 2000, we came up with a Vision 2020 that drove our journey and our development approaches as a country, and that is building consensus in terms of where we want to go, who we want to become, and how we drive that journey in itself. Honorable Moderator, I want to give also an example of, I spoke about women as participants, and I'll bring you to the example. When you look at this parliament that stands as the first women representative parliament globally, I want to put you in perspective and in history. When we first had our parliament in 1960, we had 46 members of parliament and none of them was a woman. When we had the second parliament that had 42 members in 65, none of them was a woman either. And by 1983, we had only 4 members of parliament that were men, making up 6.5% of members of parliament. By 1994, only 10 women were members of parliament, that gave us 14.9%. When we adopted the new constitution and immediately after the Liberation War, the political direction changed because the politics was about inclusion now. The Constitution created a space that allowed the 30% quota for women, and of course the requirement for all the other participants, all the other political organizations also to consider women as part of their electoral candidates. And that leads us to 61%. I'm trying to say that when we chose as a country to stay together, we also looked at those things and those laws that kept us apart. And the laws and principles that kept us apart were altered and changed into the laws and principles that stayed and brought us together. I want to speak about also the foundations of our governance. So we have chosen good governance as one of the driving pillars of our Vision 2020 then, Vision 2020 then, and that has been really sustained by four main areas. First, what we define as good governance in this country is accountability, transparency, and efficiency in deploying our scarce resources. That is a prerequisite of how we define good governance. The second element is citizen-centeredness, which is exercised through participation and inclusiveness, and by that we moved to decentralization that allowed the space for inclusion of the citizens. And of course the homegrown solutions that have been mentioned, other than confronting and being opportunities to deal with the issues that confront us as a country, they have also been an opportunity for efficiency and effectiveness, and an opportunity to allow citizens to participate in different ways of national delivery. We also have had to construct the rule of law that supports everyone and protects all citizens without discrimination. You will know that our history
had discrimination very clearly articulated even in our laws. But today we have been driven by the rule of law in a way that it supports and protects all of the citizens in a fair way. We also have embarked on social and economic transformations in a way that delivers us towards development in many ways. Coming back to the element of accountability that I mentioned as a key defining and strategic orientation, we chose to build strong institutions that will facilitate us in the process of implementing the accountability. So, for you to be able to deliver on the transformation that that Rwanda has seen, you must make every effort to have an effective government. You have to make every effort to have effective and efficient management of public funds. And that requires having different institutions that have the capacity and the commitment to deliver, which takes me to having strong institutions of accountability, like the Auditor General that reports to the Parliament, like my institution that reports to the Parliament, and of course having those institutions without strong monitoring and evaluation systems also does not give the results. Rwanda has chosen through inclusiveness to have also the opportunity of having non-state actors, civil society, the academia, media, and faith-based organizations as participants in development, but also as an opportunity for the voice of the people. I will end with a few examples. And I will use the examples that my institution uses in terms of accountability. Through accountability and the opportunity to allow citizens to participate, we have the tools that we use. And I will just give an example of one tool, which is the Citizen Report Card. The Citizen Report Card is a tool that we use every year to assess the performance in the areas of governance and service delivery, and it's a voice for the people. And people will reflect on over 16 sectors of service delivery on how much they appreciate and how much they are dissatisfied with services in those areas. But we are only able to do that because we have strategies, we have a national vision that we are delivering on, and we are able to assess from the perspective of where we are going as a country. We know citizen satisfaction should be at 90% by 2024 as per our national strategy for transformation. And when we go every year to ask citizens, we know that today we stand at 74%, and we are able to recommend to those who are in delivery on what steps they need to take as a means of enhancing delivery. I think I will leave it at that, if I may, to allow the time to be used more effectively. But I should say that homegrown solutions has been a key element. And even when I say CRC, the Citizen Report Card as a bigger thing, it's also part of homegrown solutions. But we also had bigger homegrown solutions like the Gacaca courts that allowed us to do justice and give the opportunity people to find the truth, to participate in finding justice, and also to move on beyond that particular perspective. Thank you very much, Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Kaitesi. Thank you for sharing with us the Rwanda's transformation journey, what it is, and how it benefited both to the country and to the people. But I still have a question. Although this journey that Rwanda embarked on may not be a one-fit-all solution to the entire world or to the other communities, what lessons can you share with this audience that maybe as a country that was at the beginning devastated, there is a possibility to build and to rebuild again and to reconstruct and make it more transformative country, if I may say? What lessons or what can you give as lessons to others, or maybe even to Rwandans, that we still need to do, because I imagine it's not 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll take my lessons from what I just shared. Equal opportunities for everyone is a very big foundation for transformation, because that allows inclusion of all the participants in the project of national building. And that's one thing that has given the opportunity Rwanda. I would say that equal opportunity also allows participation, as I earlier said. And with that, both the government and the citizens are moving to a common direction. A vision and a strategy for delivery is a key element. When we know where we're going, it's easier to adjust on how we go there. The opportunity for citizens to be participants and to be part of the solution is a very strong element. So if citizens within their communities have the responsibility and the duties and the opportunity to improve and transform their environment like we do in Uganda and many other approaches, that allows socio-economic transformation in a particular way. So I would really say that good governance, that I will use the same definition that I used for good governance, for economic transformation, for dealing with issues like COVID and everything, the trust between the people and the lead and the led, and the opportunity that the led are also part of the solution and not just consumers, is a very strong element that we all should learn. So I should say that accountability, transparency, and efficiency are key elements in delivering, and those are very strong elements of how we define governance in Rwanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kaitesi. Now, after or during that journey, Rwanda also faced the COVID-19 pandemic, as many other countries. Honorable Minister, we need to know how Rwanda managed this pandemic, and what responses to the public health, and let us also know healthcare impact. Honorable Minister Dr. Ngamije Daniel is the Minister of Health, and he's going to share with us the global response to COVID-19 pandemic. He's a Minister of Health since February 2020. He leads the development and execution of the health sector strategic plan. Prior to this, he served as the Director for Malaria and Neglected Tropical Diseases in WHO country office based in Kigali. Before that, he spent 10 years, from 2007 to 2017, coordinating mobilization of resources and implementation of projects funded by multilateral and bilateral partners of the Ministry of Health through a single project's implementation unit. Dr. Daniel is a member of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, an independent monitoring and accountability body to ensure preparedness for global health crises. He has served in different capacities in the entire Rwandan health system since 1995, having held a wide range of leadership positions. For the last 2 years, he led the development and successful implementation of the COVID-19 Comprehensive Response Plan. Honorable Minister, what is the impact of COVID-19 on Rwanda's health system? What are the lessons learned that Rwanda would share with other communities from its innovative initiatives? The floor is yours, Honorable Minister.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de l'Union des parlementaires africains, Excellences, Madame la Présidente du Parlement du Rwanda, honorables députés, honorables modérateurs, je suis honoré pour participer à cette session et partager avec vous l'expérience du Rwanda quant à la gestion de la pandémie de la COVID. I want to shift, if I'm allowed, to English. What I can say is that I'm not the one running slides, so okay, very good. So I have these 4 points to share with you, Excellencies. First is to tell you where we stand today with COVID after 2 years fighting this pandemic. Second, and it's probably the part which is interesting, is to share with you what kind of strategies we used to contain this pandemic, learn from you also, but also share what we did in this country. And last, the way forward, because COVID-19 is not yet over, and other pandemics anytime can happen. So where we stand today, COVID, after 4 waves. Next, please. After 4 waves, today we are lucky that the incidence is down. It's less than 5 cases for 100,000 people, almost around one case for 100,000 people. And we came from more than 500, as you can see on the curve, the fourth one at right side. At one point in January, we reached more than 500 cases for 100,000 people, which was a high incidence, good enough. And fortunately, Omicron variant was not so bad like it used to be with Delta, and this is everywhere it happened like this. As of now, we recorded more than 100,000 deaths due to COVID, but our response was including also a serious component, which is the vaccination. You can see that today we are with 61% of the entire population of Rwanda, which is vaccinated. And you can see different figures from different districts. The Kigali city, we are beyond 80% of our population in Kigali city, which is vaccinated. The few remaining, these are mainly young kids from 0 year to 11 years. Our strategy is to get vaccines, at least to vaccinate kids between 5 and 11 years old. We are already in process of getting those vaccines so that we can reach 70% of our population by July 2022. So what we can say, this good performance, next slide, are due to what? What can we share with others in terms of strategies we used to contain this pandemic? A pandemic, it's an unexpected event. So you will be surprised that I start by saying that the anticipation was the first strategy for us we used to make sure that we contain this disease. In 2019, in the region, we had cases of Ebola in some of our neighbors' countries. And from there, we started to build structures to prevent transmission of Ebola in the country. So we set those structures at different levels. We set some intervention at the point of entry, borders with the countries where we had this pandemic, Ebola. But also, we started to build again our capacity for testing. And staff were trained to be able to detect if there is suspicion of any case of Ebola, so that investigation can start and we try to contain the pandemic. we are around August 2019. In September, October, if you can recall, COVID cases were reported in China in October 2019, one. Building on those interventions that we made, next, we started to prepare ourselves to be ready to face COVID-19 pandemic, because although we could expect that the pandemic will be contained, the outbreak at that time will be contained in China, in December, COVID was already transmitted in some other country in Asia. And in January 2020, it was declared as a disease for concern by WHO. So it was becoming a pandemic. So building on what we did, we set strong governance structures for us to contain this pandemic. And from the central level up to the lowest level, we established these committees. The first one, the National Command Post, chaired by Honorable Prime Minister, and of course other committees at the provincial and district level. The whole idea was to make sure that at the central level, we coordinate the response against COVID. Because the way the pandemic was described, it was affecting more than the simple sector of the health sector. It was affecting the entire country, several sectors. It's normal that the response should be well coordinated, at least at the level of Right Honorable Prime Minister office. So the committee was established to coordinate all these organs and sectors for a comprehensive response to COVID. Next. But also, part of the response, in addition to those committees at national level and at the lower level, the intention was to make sure that the entire population and the local leaders, they own the response. But some interventions were critical and were prerequisite for a strong response due to COVID. First was to invest in the primary health care, because we believe that we can't respond properly to a pandemic like COVID and any other pandemic in the future if we don't invest in the primary health care. I'm sharing some key pillars in the primary health care where we invested. In human resources, we were there to make sure that with the workload due to COVID, we have additional staff to make sure that there is no disruption of services, essential services in health facility, because the majority of the staff would be busy with COVID. So additional human resources were required. Data use. You can't manage a pandemic if you don't have information. Based on the existing health management information system in the sector, we increase the way of collecting information to make sure that we have accurate information to guide the response. Of course, the supply chain, I will come on it in the following slide. The supply chain for essential commodities was key, because for a consistent response, you need to make sure that you have permanent supply of key commodities. Therefore, services can be given in a consistent manner. But also, one key ingredient in the primary health care is the community health insurance. This is a key component because we need to make sure that in our journey to build our health system, we ensure accessibility of our population to health services. One of the barriers that we know, all of us here, is the financial barrier to reach health services. So investing in community health insurance was a way to avoid any constraint for our population to use health services and to be tested if required. Finally, it was about COVID, and you could not treat COVID cases in the same room with other diseases because of the high transmissibility of this disease. Identification of sites where these cases should be treated was an important investment that we made. Next. Next. COVID was a new disease. At the beginning, no one, even among experts, could say that was it an airborne disease? Was it a disease with transmission by direct contact? So, was it massively killing or not? So, with all those information that we could not master at the beginning of this pandemic, we were requested to innovate in our response by using new tools, by using new methods to fight a pandemic like COVID. New way of doing business, as I said a few minutes ago, was to make sure that services are provided in a consistent manner. And therefore, the supply of all key commodities, from tests, from therapeutics, and other commodities, was a key step to control, to contain. So the government decided to set an interministerial committee for faster procurement of commodities. Because one of the issues when we talk with colleagues in different countries was the fact that services were not provided in a consistent manner. Sometimes you had shortage of key commodities and you could not consistently provide services because at one point you have shortage of those key commodities. So the government decided to have this committee to ensure that transparency, economy are still in the process of procuring key commodities. Second, use of technology. As I said, COVID was a new disease. We were requested to use new technologies to contain this pandemic. Among these technologies that we used robots for transmission of some messages, for giving some services in isolation rooms, because people were scared to be in touch with people who were affected by COVID. I'm talking about March, April 2020, where we were with very few information on this disease. Even health workers were scared to treat patients with COVID. We used bracelets to make sure that anyone who is tested positive can be self-isolated and controlled in its movement. So the government invested in the use of those technologies, like the use of bracelets, and also GPS tracking, because we're like tracking drivers at the entry point from different countries, and we track their movement wherever they are passing in the country, either for supplying commodities in Rwanda or in transit towards other countries, other neighbors countries like Burundi and DRC. And we also used other digital software, especially when we're requested to test, to track, and isolate. We could know whoever was tested positive, where this person is, by combining different softwares, including phone monitoring. Another strategy that we used, part of innovation, was that the public sector could not do this business alone. So we attracted the private sector to come and be part of the response. At the beginning of this pandemic, and people will be surprised that even these simple masks were not manufactured in most of African countries, even in some European countries. Coveralls, face shield, all this simple material to prevent transmission were not manufactured in our countries. So we attracted and incentivized private sector to come and be part of the solution, to manufacture these commodities and these tools for the control of the disease. even the sanitizer were started to be manufactured massively because of this pandemic. And finally, part of innovation, as you can see, His Excellency the President of the Republic, who was personally coordinating this fight, because every 2 weeks, the cabinet was meeting to make sure that we came with adequate measures. So he was engaging all actors, from the central level up to the lowest level. Here, he was visiting the command posts and meeting staff who were in charge of responding to COVID-19. So the continuous engagement of our community was a key intervention, because for us, we didn't deny this disease. The denial of a pandemic, it's a big error that a country can commit. Because denying, it doesn't remove the disease and its challenges. So we didn't deny this disease. The denial, we recognized the disease, and we worked for a comprehensive response. And our population was constantly informed on what is the disease, how is it transmitted, what are drugs, what are vaccines. So every day, they were informed on what was happening, to the point that COVID was an issue for everybody, and everybody was requested to be an actor to contain this disease. So, as a consequence, vaccine hesitancy in Rwanda, it doesn't exist at all. So that's why you can see we are able to reach 61% of coverage of vaccination. Next. So these are technologies that we used, as I described them. You have drones, you have bracelets, you have robots, you have those maps that where we could, especially the one at the left corner, we could like map the incidence of the disease depending where people who are tested positive are located. And therefore, rather than going for massive lockdown, we could go for localized lockdown in the city of Kigali, just because we could know where are patients, which sectors or which villages are affected, and we came with a solution which is really, which corresponds to where the disease is. But at the beginning, we went with a full country lockdown before we said this technology, before we start to use these technologies. But later on, we were able to go with localized responses depending where cases were. Next. The other strategy, the third one, is the agility to adapt interventions. COVID and other pandemic are evolving diseases. The way it starts, it's changed. The story of variants, we came to learn it with COVID, starting by Alpha, then Delta, then Omicron. I don't know tomorrow which variant we'll have. So we might be prepared. We must be prepared and be enough flexible to set a response which corresponds to the real information that we have. I was saying that we were adjusting our response depending accurate information, and therefore the cabinet was informed regularly with the most updated information to take decisions which are accurate and corresponding to the magnitude of the disease. And also, next strategy is opportunities. Even in time of pandemics, there are opportunities. You need to look opportunities even in hardship time. This is what we did for investing in lab capacity. So we increased our lab capacity. At the beginning of this pandemic, 14th March 2020, the day we had our first case, we could only do PCR here in Kigali, only in the National Referral Lab. Today, we can do PCR in all 53 district and provincial hospitals. We build capacity with required equipment, and staff were trained. We are doing sequencing of the genome so that today we know which type of variant is in the community. So we can do this genomic surveillance and therefore act accordingly. The other key investment was to construct a mobile hospital in the middle, in the slide there. Because at the beginning of this pandemic, existing health facilities were used as a treatment center for COVID, to the point that this hospital here in the city of Kigali, with 130 beds, was completely for COVID. So it means the population was requested to use hospitals which are far from where they are in this district of Nyarugenge. This situation could not continue, so we went and worked on the long-term solution. If today we are talking about COVID, and tomorrow we might face Ebola, we might face any other pandemic, should we again take an hospital in a district and use it for that pandemic?
Honorable Minister, that was my next question.
Okay.
Allow me maybe to come in.
Yeah.
With COVID-19 pandemic, for sure, the unprecedented progress made in global health over the past 20 years has reverted. And Africa was predicted to have the highest burden of COVID-19 as a result of limitations in healthcare systems. Now, Honorable Minister, after this experience of COVID-19 pandemic, do you think that Africa or Rwanda in particular would be ready to face a new pandemic tomorrow?
Thank you, Honorable Moderator. I think it will depend on what we are able to do today at a national level, but also at international level. I will come with more details on this answer. I was talking about investing in primary health care. I was talking about taking opportunities like this one to reinforce the health system. If you want to be ready to face future pandemic, there are some critical investment that we should do. And I'm happy to be in front of parliamentarians who vote budget. We need to make sure that there is enough budget for health and for some key investment so that we are prepared to face future pandemic. As I was saying, if we have a new pandemic, we no longer go and take an hospital and use it for that pandemic. We'll use at least this facility, and we did also in other hospitals where we increase the capacity in our ICU, in intensive care treatment units, so that if there is any pandemic, we have capacity to treat those patients in those health facilities. Next. We also increased our capacity for oxygen production. When we had Delta variant wave in July and August last year, you have seen in different countries how we're struggling to have sufficient oxygen to treat patients in hospitals. We're also at risk of being in shortage of oxygen production in health facilities. The government invested up to $5 million to procure these oxygen plants in 2 months. We bought them from China, from Turkey, and today in all hospitals we have this oxygen plant, which today, if there is any pandemic where a patient will be in need of oxygen, this is solved. This is an investment that we did and which is served for long for any patient who will be in need of oxygen. Not only for COVID or other pandemic, but also the way we manage patients in ICUs. Patients in ICUs, they need sometimes to be supplied with oxygen. You can see the ultra-cold chain at the left side. We bought these freezers which can go up to -80 degree temperature. And it's helped the day Pfizer vaccine were available. I think in Africa, we were 3 countries ready to receive Pfizer vaccine in the first round because we invested in buying these ultra-cold chain freezers. And the last, you can see, as we invest in the future, we need to start to think manufacturing vaccine as long-term solution. We are in partnership with BioNTech. These containers will be exported to Rwanda before the end of the next year. Works will start in June this year to prepare the arrival of these containers where Pfizer vaccine will be manufactured, but it gives opportunity to manufacture other vaccines because using mRNA platform, you are able to manufacture malaria, TB, and HIV vaccine, but also other treatment like immunotherapy treatment that can be used by mastering mRNA techniques. Next. I'm going to end. The impact of this disease was that we feared disruption of services. So we were there to monitor and try to mitigate negative impact in use of services. So these are some indicators that we were able to track. There are so many, but at least you can see like patients who were on treatment of ARV during this pandemic with a lot of lockdown, with curfew, with different restrictions in transport, public transport. We use different techniques, including supply of drugs using drones. We also using outreach intervention, go and meet patients where they are to avoid that there is disruption of services. You can see in March 2019, April and May, the coverage of people who were on treatment of ARV didn't drop as we could expect. It was around 85, 87, 85. It means people were still using, they could get their treatment on time. Because we fear that at one point, people could not use services properly. The family planning as well, the coverage, and also antenatal consultation. We are like monitoring those indicators to make sure that even in the time of COVID, there is no disruption of services. Next, before I end. The transformative partnership as long-term solution for the management of COVID, but also other pandemic. I think the way we managed this interaction with our partners, were like we shared information with our partners. They were informed on what we are doing. They were informed on the pandemic, nothing to hide. So they could be supportive. And today we are very happy to see that some of them are willing to transfer technologies, as I said, for manufacturing vaccines in the country. I think we believe that during pandemic like this one, the transfer of skills and knowledge is an achievement that will serve not only Rwanda, but also the entire continent of Africa, because this vaccine plant that is going to be constructed in Rwanda, it will be to serve the entire continent. We are reinforcing our institution like Rwanda FDA to make sure that it meets international standard, so that vaccine which will be produced here in Rwanda, they are meeting international standard, they can be exported everywhere in the continent, and they can be bought by Gavi, by COVAX facility, because they meet international standard. To end, in terms of moving forward, we need to be prepared for future pandemic. And we need to continue investing in what we did, reinforcing investment that are in place, and also make sure that we continue to invest in health, because it's clear that when you invest in health, you invest for sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And the presentation took time, but I think it was important, because the pandemic also is taking us the precious time that we have. Then we need really to understand and to see how to move forward. To face new pandemics tomorrow is possible. That's what Minister said. It's possible, but it needs money. It needs budget. Then we're moving to economic impact and the recovery process. Our presenter will be Honorable Richard Tusabe, Honorable Minister of State in charge of National Treasury. Minister of State in charge of National Treasury serves as Minister from it's okay. He holds a master's degree in strategic planning from Edinburgh Business School, Heriot-Watt University, and is a certified public accountant. He served on the following boards as a director: Bank of Kigali, Simerwa Limited, MTM Rwanda, Sonarwa General Insurance, Development Bank of Rwanda, and Crystal Telecom Limited, respectively. Minister of State Richard previously worked as the Director General of Rwanda Social Security Board, the Commissioner General of Rwanda Revenue Authority, Deputy Commissioner General and Commissioner for Customs Services of Rwanda Revenue Authority, and also as Chief Financial Officer of MTN Rwanda. Honorable Minister, the damage inflicted by COVID-19 pandemic in our economies remains considerable. The economic growth has already evaporated, giving rise to a global recession. Like in many other countries across the globe and in Africa, Rwanda has managed to deal with its challenges and even to face its consequences in different areas of development. What is the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 in Rwanda, and what are the efforts to mitigate that impact? Honorable Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honorable Speaker of Parliament, the President of APU, Secretary General APU, dear Excellencies, thank you very much for the opportunity to have me here this morning to discuss the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on our economy, and also what we are trying to do to make sure that we recover faster to regain what we've lost during this pandemic. I'll start with the global context. I think COVID-19 negatively impacted the global economy, and we saw in 2020 we had a contraction of about 3.1% globally. And that did not spare sub-Saharan Africa, where we saw a contraction of 1.7%. And then Rwanda being a part of the global economy, we also had a contraction of about 3.4% in 2020. But it's very important also to paint a picture of where we were just before the COVID-19 hit us. Before 2019, we were growing at about 7.5% GDP growth year on year, or average for the last 10 years or so. But in 2019 specifically, the economy had grew by 9.4%, 9.5% growth. That's what we had registered in 2019. So, a very good growth over the years. You get this shock in 1 year, and you are in negative growth of 3.4%. What that means is that even before the pandemic, we had challenges on the economy. The economy we were just a good growth, but if I may use the word, not really strong, in the sense that 1 year would cause us such a big shock. The shock that came to our economy was mainly driven by a contraction again and a decrease in customer confidence globally and customer demand, because the global economy was affected by global demand and global supply, as the global supply chains were affected as well. So what did this mean to our economy? One, we saw a big shock on the revenues, the fiscal side. The tax revenues, of course, went down because the business were not performing. We saw a drop in exports, more importantly on the tourism sector, which takes a big percentage of our services. And that, coupled with what the Minister of Health, my colleague, has just presented, where you are being called to spend more money, the reaction of expansionary fiscal policy, you find ourselves in a situation where you don't have revenues and you need more money to fight the pandemic. So that put us on pressure to borrow more funds to sustain and fight the pandemic. In terms of debt levels, we moved from about 58% to close to 80% today. So we moved from what we call moderate level of ranking, from low, so we moved from low to moderate. And that, for you to do that again in such a short time, we needed very strong support from the development partners to be able to support us to avail the funds that are concessional in nature. The other key impact, economic impact, was the fiscal space. We had a fiscal deficit of about 5.6% before the pandemic. When the pandemic hit us, because of the spending that we had to do, we moved to about 9.4% fiscal deficit. So again, that's a big shock on the macroeconomic indicators. The other key impact on the economy, as we are getting affected as a government, also the private sector is being affected. So we are increasing our debt levels as a government, and also the debts of the private and the corporates is getting worse because they cannot afford to service their debt. So again, that's a big shock on the private sector that is struggling to service their obligations to sustain the business. Another key impact that we realized by the pandemic was the shock on the supply chain. We realized that we couldn't procure items in time because some countries were becoming restrictive, even restricting their exports of the products that we needed at that time. So all these shocks that are fiscal, monetary, and regulatory in nature, we had to come up with measures that would not only help us to stop the pandemic in terms of people not losing lives, but also to protect jobs and ensure that even when times come to recover, we can recover better in a sustainable manner. So we came up with measures that would really try to help us navigate these tough times. And the measures, again, are categorized into physical, monetary, financial regulation. Speaking on fiscal, we came up with measures to ensure that, for example, we protect jobs. If you look at hotels and the travel industry, which were hit most, we had to make sure that we support the hotel sector by availing what we called Economic Recovery Fund 1, where we availed about $50 million to the sector to help to restructure the loans of the hotel sector to ensure that we don't get the operators in the hotels collapsing. The same intervention that we made of Economic Recovery Fund, an envelope of about $100 million, of which 50% went to hotels, we tried to support other private sector actors in the market. As we do that, also we had to make sure that the financial sector remained sound and prudent in terms of financial market stability. So through the central bank, we put up the following interventions. One, we reduced the repo rate from 5% to 4.5%. We also availed about $50 billion to commercial banks to ensure that they access liquidity to support their balance sheet. And while we do that, also we are allowed to prevent credit risk. We allow the banks to restructure the loans that were likely to fall into non-performing category of their loans. Another key intervention that was done on the monetary side of the economy was to ensure that we remove charges, because we realized as the pandemic was peaking, we had to operate in the e-environment. And when you operate in the e-environment, you have financial charges, for example, on mobile money transactions. So we removed any charges on mobile money transactions and also financial services to ensure that we facilitate and encourage adoption of e-environment of operation. So that has helped us to ensure that people still transact even when the pandemic is at its peak. Another key intervention that we did that again was very important was to engage the development partners. When we get a shock of this nature as a country, that's the time to call on all stakeholders of the economy. So civil society, the development partners, the private sector, and specifically this time talk about the development partners, we engaged to ensure that we do strong mobilization of resources. And that's what allowed us to mobilize money and increase our debt levels that are more or less concessional in nature, but at the same time, timely to support the interventions and investments that were required to support the health sector, support private sector, while at the same time investing for inclusive and timely recovery when recovery starts. Another key intervention that we did on fiscal side was to ease the private sector pain in terms of paying taxes. We had to make a relief on some of the businesses to ensure that they don't pay, and also change the model of paying taxes from based on what they were paying the previous year to paying based on real numbers that they are trading at that time. But also more importantly, trying to pay the private sector in time. For example, if you've procured services from private sector as a government, can you try to pay very fast? As you pay very fast, you support them, and then they can also come back and pay the taxes that you've been trying to call for. So all these are interventions, but also on the social side, we had interventions that we had to make. You can imagine when we had a total lockdown, especially in the city, we had to make sure that there is cash transfer, there is food distribution, and always at the same time we try to create jobs through public works. So all these are interventions that we are trying to put in place to ensure that we support timely recovery and at the same time protect the livelihood of the citizens. Another intervention that we did was increase the adoption of digital technology and investment and encouraging people to do online services. Learning from the shocks that we had, especially on the global supply chain, we also had to make sure what can we do to ensure that next time, during the pandemic and even in the future, we shorten the supply chain. So we came up with a campaign to support manufacturing. So we came up with a campaign of 2 years to what we call Build and Manufacture to Recover, where we gave tax and non-tax incentives to support manufacturers and ensure that they are actually building capabilities and shortening the supply chain to ensure that the time to supply within the economy is shortened. So those are the interventions that we put in place. They've been very comprehensive and inclusive in nature to the extent that the students were participating in all this. And we really thank our partners, be it civil society, development partners that have supported us in this journey. And we believe that now that we're starting the recovery phase, we are prepared. To give you a sense of where we're heading and the projections, 2021, of which the numbers should be coming for the end of this month, we believe that we're going to grow by about 10.2%. And then 2022, possibly getting to 7. So we believe that we can quickly regain our growth momentum to the post-COVID numbers within the next 2 years. But again, considering what the damage that COVID has caused, especially on impacting with the the most vulnerable, the most poor, we are really trying to strengthen our social protection programs to ensure that we impact on the most vulnerable. The people who are close to the poverty lines are supported in a more conclusive and sustainable manner. So, Honorable Moderator, I think those are the experience that we had with COVID, which I believe we share with most of other countries on the continent and globally, but we really hope that we can recover faster. Of course, we look forward to learn from each other and see how we can make this very inclusive and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. But before you close, please, what lessons to learn by our countries from this pandemic, specifically in terms of economic area? Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. I think the lessons learned are very simple. Before the economy functions, before you have economic transactions, you have a society, you have a community. So I'll start with the community and the society. You need to have, we've seen different reactions from different countries, even on the continent and even globally. The lessons that we learned from the pandemic was that the social fabric between the government, between the leadership and the citizens has to be extremely sound. Because when we call on the citizens to behave, to cooperate, to join the cause and the fight, they reacted positively without hesitation. And that's why I think you can see there are no protests in our country. Vaccination numbers are moving very fast. There's no pushback and fight on the government drive. So it becomes very easy to engage the citizens when these crises hit home. But you need to build that foundation even before they come on board to hit you. Number two is food security. Whatever we do as a continent, being a net food importer, I think we really need to think extremely smarter on this. Even the COVID-19, even what is happening today, the new developments that are happening on the global scale, food security is a problem. And how do we fail to be self-reliant on food? So I think that's another lesson that we learned, that we need, even before you think of any other innovation, can you be self-reliant on food? Another lesson learned is digital economy is a very reliable economy. You can still transact and operate when you are forced to stop physical movements if your digital economy is working. And I think this is something that we share on the continent. We just need to make sure that we are moving very fast and learn from each other and what has been done. The next lesson that we've learned is saving. The pandemic comes, we have a lockdown of 3 weeks, and you are forced to go and start feeding people. But can we have a mechanism where the citizens start saving money? Like what we've tried to create, like some of the programs, like a savings scheme. Across Africa, maybe we are at different levels of development. Possibly 5% of the continent's working force is pensionable. So where is the 95% or the 90%? Can you create programs where our citizens can start saving and ensure that when these crises come to hit us, they can survive as we support them. Individuals can survive while we are supporting them to ensure that they don't fall below the poverty lines. Another key lesson learned is having a strong KYC. Know your citizen. Do you know your citizens? Do you have a citizen registry that tells you who is who in age group, economic clusters, and when these shocks come, how do you access them? Targeted interventions. You cannot make targeted interventions if you don't know who is who within your citizen registry. So, and that's another area. It's an opportunity that I think we should leverage, all of us, and enhance. Of course, for you to do that, you need big data capabilities, which I think the continent is also adopting very fast. Another key lesson learned is having a strong macroeconomic fundamentals. How is your fiscal deficit? How are your debt levels? do you have space? How are you going to do physical consolidation that is sound while protecting our macroeconomic fundamentals? Another key aspect is focusing on the private sector. We've realized that, yes, some of the governments might be doing very, very well, but if you don't support the private sector, and you, in time of need, you are going to be forced to engage them and collaborate with them. So it's very important that we have a smooth and collaborative engagement with the private sector continuously, and that will give us a chance to have a private sector-led growth within our continent and the countries. The last one, Honorable Moderator, is the importance of regional and international cooperations. As the global shocks come to hit us, how are we performing on the regional scale? The regional economic integration, are we ready? How do we leverage and use that platform to speak to our common causes? So I think those are the lessons learned, but again, there are so many opportunities that we can embark on, and I really look forward to, of course, with your support, to see how can we optimize and learn from each other and enhance these opportunities that we are seeing in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you. Those lessons bring us to think big and see how, as Africans, we can move together. That's the next topic. Fostering implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area for Africa's economic transformation. This presentation is going to be done by Honorable Minister Habyarimana Beata, who is the Minister of Trade and Industry of Rwanda since March last year. She's an economist and financial advisor by profession, with over 19 years of experience in the financial industry in both domestic, Pan-African, and international institutions. Prior to her appointment, Honorable Minister Beata Uwamaliza Habyarimana served as Deputy Managing Director of Bank of Africa, Chief Executive Officer of Agaseke Bank, and Head of Compliance and Banque Populaire du Rwanda. Her area of expertise covers business, reshuffling, and organizational change. She also played a key role in establishing the financial ethics and compliance function within the financial industry by setting up the first compliance forum under the Rwanda Bankers Association. Minister Beata holds a Master of Business Administration, majoring in finance from, sorry if I pronounce not well the institution, Maastricht School of Management in Netherlands, and a bachelor degree in public economics from the University of Rwanda. Honorable Minister, African economies have traditionally been fragmented and lacking the scale to compete globally, which has led to the pursuit of market integration, particularly toward a single market on the African continent. Rwanda hosted the signing ceremony for the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in 2018, and was one of the first countries to ratify that agreement. It entered into force in May 2019, and trading started in January 2021. Honorable Minister, with Rwanda having ratified this agreement, what has been done so far toward implementing the agreement and the protocol to the treaty establishing the African Economic Community relating to free movement of persons, right of residence, and right of establishment? What are the expectations of the countries that have already ratified? And what are countries that have not yet ratified missing, or what would they miss? Honorable Minister, the floor is yours. And welcome.
Thank you, Moderator. Your Excellency, the President of the Executive Committee of the African Parliamentary Union, and distinguished audience, I will first greet you, but I will shift to French, the presentation being in English displayed on the screen. Pour parler de la zone libre-échange continentale africaine, ou la ZLECAf, nous allons revoir ensemble les statuts, ensuite l'état des lieux, actuellement au niveau continental. J'aborderai ensuite les instruments opérationnels qui peuvent nous aider ou que nous sommes offerts pour permettre l'implémentation. Par après, j'aborderai l'implémentation nationale au niveau du Rwanda, quelles sont les instances à mettre en place pour que l'implémentation puisse prendre lieu. Et enfin, j'aborderai les différents bénéfices escomptés de la ZLECAf, bien qu'ils soient longs, mais je soulignerai surtout ceux qui sont les plus importants. En ce qui concerne le statut de ratification, des 55 pays membres de l'Union africaine, nous avons 54 pays qui ont signé l'accord. Il s'agit donc de 98%, et comme cela a été mentionné, a été signé au Rwanda. Le Rwanda lui-même a signé le 26 mai la ratification, et c'est fait à Kigali. Des pays qui ont signé l'accord, nous avons 42 pays sur 54 qui ont ratifié et déposé les instruments de ratification. Il s'agit donc de 77% des pays qui ont signé l'accord. Les autres pays restants, nous avons certains pays qui avaient signé mais pas encore ratifié et déposé, bien que dans ces 2 dernières semaines, on a eu des ratifications. Ce que nous pouvons en tirer de manière particulière est un engagement considérable politique dans l'implémentation de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la ZLECAf. Le pays qui n'a pas signé l'agrément est l'Érythrée, tandis que les pays qui avaient signé l'agrément mais n'avaient pas ratifié, nous avons le Botswana, le Mozambique, le Madagascar, la Somalie, le Soudan du Sud, la Libye, les îles Comores, la Guinée-Bissau, le Libéria, le Bénin et le Maroc. Pour l'audience ici présente, nous pensons que la ratification qui est signée par les membres du Parlement est un point important à souligner pour pouvoir encourager les pays restants à ratifier et déposer afin de bénéficier des différents avantages de rejoindre la ZLECAf. Suivant. Quel est l'état des lieux? Pour l'état des lieux, au niveau de la ZLECAf et de tous les États membres qui y participent, il y a différentes discussions qui prennent lieu pour pouvoir aborder en détail comment est-ce que le commerce pourra se faire. Principalement, nous avons le commerce des biens et le commerce des services. Ce sont des discussions qui se font au niveau de chaque membre, mais certains pourcentages ont été agréés au niveau de tout le continent. L'agrément explique que 90% des biens pourront être libéralisés dans une période de 5 à 10 ans. Il y a 7% des biens qui pourront être libéralisés à partir de la 7e année et continuer un processus de libéralisation jusqu'à la 13e année. Enfin, il y a 3% de biens qui, eux, sont exclus de toute ces libéralisations particulières. Parmi les biens qui sont exclus, nous avons le riz, la farine de maïs, le fromage, le yaourt, l'huile, le textile, l'automobile, le bois, les peintures, les granites et les barres de fer. Du côté du commerce des services, au niveau continental, et en regardant ce qu'il y a de faisable dans les différents États membres, il y a 5 priorités de secteurs qui ont été définies pour la libéralisation, permettant un accès au marché, permettant aussi des traitements nationaux. Il est très important de souligner ces 5 services parce que, comme ça a été mentionné par mes collègues ministres, il y a certains services qui sont avec beaucoup de potentiel au niveau africain et ainsi chaque pays doit regarder où il a son avantage pour y investir massivement. Les 5 services qui ont été mis en priorité en termes de secteurs économiques est d'abord le secteur financier, qui a beaucoup de potentiel une fois considéré au niveau continental. Le secteur du tourisme, je pense dû à la beauté du continent. Le secteur du transport, qui a beaucoup d'opportunités aussi et qui faciliterait l'accès aux marchés différents dans les différents États et régions. La communication, qu'elle soit la communication téléphone ou digitale, ainsi que les services de business qui peuvent être provis pour l'administration, la comptabilité et autres professions. Suivant. Passons aux outils ou aux instruments opérationnels qui sont mis en place par la ZLECAf pour permettre au pays de pouvoir investir, de pouvoir matérialiser, de pouvoir réaliser d'une manière concrète ce que la ZLECAf nous apporte. Il y a d'abord l'organe de règlement des différends. Il va de pair que quand il s'agit de commerce, il y a parfois des différends. Et donc, l'un des organes sur lesquels les États membres sont en train de travailler pour définir sa mise en place est l'organe des règlements de différends. Il permet d'établir et d'adresser les différents conflits qui peuvent avoir lieu une fois que le commerce commence. Il permet aussi de renforcer le mécanisme de la ZLECAf. À ce sujet, les différents pays nomment un jury qui peut écouter les cas, les analyser et pouvoir en tirer des conclusions. À part l'organe des règlements des différends, il y a aussi un organe d'appel. L'organe d'appel écoute et reçoit tous les appels qui ont eu lieu après un jugement pour en donner un jugement final et pour permettre l'implémentation et l'action concrète à être prise par les pays. J'ai commencé par l'organe de règlement des différends, mais c'est au cas où il y a des conflits. Il y a aussi d'autres instruments d'opérationnalisation qui permettent la mise en place. Suivant. Parmi les autres instruments opérationnels, il y a la règle des origines. La règle des origines est une règle sur laquelle les États membres se sont convenus pour que de ce commerce, l'on puisse avoir uniquement les produits pour lesquels la traçabilité est sûre du pays d'origine. Et quand elle est confirmée, ce produit a accès au taux préférentiel et au commerce préférentiel. Les différents États membres ont discuté au niveau des différents organes de la ZLECAf, en commençant par les comités techniques, les comités des secrétaires permanents, ainsi qu'au niveau ministériel, pour avoir des conventions sur les différents produits auxquels seront applicables les règles d'origine. Jusqu'à présent, durant les différentes négociations que les États membres ont pu mener, la Convention arrive jusqu'à 87,7% de produits convenus. Il s'était entendu avec le secrétariat de la ZLECAf que le commerce commence lorsque nous aurons 90% de conventions sur les règles d'origine, mais nous pensons que dans les très proches semaines à venir, le niveau requis sera atteint. Mais je voudrais ramener à votre attention certains secteurs qui montrent un potentiel particulier quand il en revient aux règles d'origine, à la production au niveau de nos États membres, au lieu de nous tourner vers les importations hors du continent. En ce qui concerne le secteur automobile, bien qu'il soit de 1,4% en termes de proportion des produits discutés, l'objectif est que des 5 millions d'automobiles qui sont achetés, importés, arrivant en Afrique, nous puissions partir de au-delà de 1 million à 4 millions produits sur le continent africain. C'est une immense opportunité et qui nous montre combien, si le continent africain ne réagit pas pour investir dans les produits du secteur automobile, les autres continents y viendraient rapidement. Le deuxième secteur est le secteur du textile. Le secteur du textile prend 10% des produits discutés pour pouvoir certifier les règles d'origine, mais il est aussi un des secteurs qui a une grosse opportunité de croissance économique au niveau des États membres et au niveau continental. Et il est clair qu'avec l'agriculture des matières premières comme le coton, cela demande à ce que chaque pays puisse se revoir et se positionner dans la chaîne de valeur de la production du secteur textile pour pouvoir avancer dans l'intégration régionale. Un troisième produit est le sucre, qui, bien qu'il ait 1% en termes de proportion des produits qui sont discutés pour les règles d'origine, mais montre un grand potentiel de croissance au niveau africain. Soyons assurés que les États membres s'engagent à en produire suffisamment. Le dernier secteur que je voudrais aussi ramener à votre attention est l'huile de cuisine, qui elle aussi a un potentiel tant dans les matières premières que dans l'agro-processing, mais où jusqu'à présent beaucoup d'imports au-delà du continent viennent répondre aux besoins des Africains. Pour ce premier point, des instruments opérationnels, il est clair que les règles d'origine, une fois mises en place, et les agréments sur lesquels nous sommes sur le point d'obtenir le minimum requis, doivent être soutenus par des plans nationaux dans les différents secteurs agro-potentiels qui peuvent permettre que le continent lui-même puisse revenir à la sécurité alimentaire dont nous disions, mais aussi à encourager l'industrialisation et le processing des produits. Un deuxième instrument opérationnel mis à la portée des États membres est le système panafricain de règlement des paiements, ou le PAPS. Il est clair que si nous nous mettons à produire et à remonter nos industries entre pays au niveau du continent, la question des paiements revient immédiatement et la manière dont ils sont réglés en tenant compte des différentes monnaies sur le continent. Le système panafricain de règlement des paiements est proposé par la Banque africaine d'export-import, Afreximbank, et qui, en partenariat avec le secrétariat de la ZLECAf, propose aux différents pays du continent d'adopter, d'entrer et de régulariser leur système de paiement en alignement avec le PAPS. Ceci permettra une rapidité des règlements, évitera différents déséquilibres en termes de monnaie. En termes de phase pilote, La CEDEAO a été choisie pour expérimenter le PAPS, quitte à refléter aussi sur les autres pays et dans les autres régions des communautés économiques régionales du continent. Et bien sûr, se répand dans les différents États membres. Mais cet outil aussi demande une certaine organisation, de même que pour la règle des origines, parce que chaque banque centrale dans chaque État membre doit revoir à quel niveau de préparation le pays se trouve pour être prêt à s'embrasser ou à s'aligner au PAPS, au système panafricain de règlement des paiements. Cela engage une réglementation légale, cela engage des systèmes logistiques et informatiques, cela engage aussi les différents acteurs du secteur financier et vous pouvez bien y voir qu'il y a toute l'organisation nécessaire qui vient d'une décision politique du pays pour se préparer à pouvoir embrasser sans inconvénient le système de règlement des paiements. Next. Parmi les instruments opérationnels, nous avons aussi un mécanisme en ligne de la ZLECAf. C'est une plateforme qui est en préparation, mais qui permettra aux pays, différents pays, de pouvoir rapporter, de pouvoir évaluer, de pouvoir éliminer les barrières non tarifaires. C'est une plateforme qui inclut un site web et qui inclut la messagerie. Je vais simplement souligner que ce mécanisme en ligne est clé dans ce sens qu'au-delà de la chute des taxes et de l'ouverture des pays les uns envers les autres, il y a parfois en termes de commerce régional pas mal nombre de barrières non tarifaires. Cela a été aussi exploité et donc ce mécanisme en ligne de la ZLECAf permettra à chaque État membre de pouvoir rapporter quelles sont les barrières non tarifaires. Ça permettra au secrétariat lui-même de pouvoir évaluer les différents rapports qui y sont et enfin de prendre action. Parce que le but unique de la ZLECAf, c'est l'élimination des barrières. C'est un flot assez rapide et fluide de commerce entre les États membres. Un autre instrument opérationnel est l'Observatoire de commerce africain. C'est un observatoire qui pourra permettre à nos générations d'avoir suffisamment d'informations sur le commerce, de pouvoir avoir des informations sur les obstacles qui s'y trouvent, de pouvoir identifier les informations qui manquent pour faciliter le commerce et de pouvoir aussi parler des opportunités dans les différents États membres. Cet observatoire de commerce africain pourra nous permettre d'avoir des statistiques, non seulement en termes de données, mais pour pouvoir permettre aux États membres de prendre des décisions. Le but ultime étant d'augmenter le mouvement de biens et de services rendus dans les différents États. Suivant. Je voudrais en revenir au-delà de la structure très brève de l'organisation de la ZLECAf et qui est proposée aux États membres pour pouvoir les mettre en place, parler de l'implémentation au niveau national du Rwanda et qui, bien sûr, je suppose, se passe aussi au niveau des autres États membres du continent. De prime abord, nous avons dû définir une stratégie d'implémentation au niveau national de la ZLECAf. Et comme je l'ai mentionné auparavant, en identifiant les différents secteurs où nous pensons que les règles d'origine pourraient être en faveur de nos opérateurs économiques. En identifiant où nous voudrions nous situer comme un pays au niveau de la chaîne de valeur et de la production. En analysant les différents produits clés que nous pensons nous pourrions produire ou offrir aux autres États membres. En identifiant aussi les marchés où nous avons besoin de pouvoir aussi entrer en étroite collaboration. Mais le tout, il est important, on le souligne au niveau des chaînes de valeur régionale. Et c'est un élément clé qui, non pas seulement dans notre stratégie d'implémentation du Rwanda, devrait aussi être reflété dans les autres pays, où on travaille en chaîne, soit au niveau régional, soit au niveau continental, dans différents secteurs. Cette stratégie est aussi importante pour donner une feuille de route et ainsi pouvoir expliquer les différentes actions qui vont pouvoir être découlées de l'accord de la ZLECAf. Au-delà de la stratégie d'implémentation, il y a un comité d'implémentation nationale. Le comité d'implémentation nationale sous-entend que différentes institutions doivent être partenaires dans cette implémentation. Et en même moment, pouvoir aligner la stratégie d'implémentation aux différents buts nationaux en termes de croissance économique. Il s'agit aussi de faire part des différents points à définir pour chaque pays en termes de négociation. Parce qu'il est clair qu'au niveau du commerce des biens et au niveau des services, il y a d'intenses négociations entre les États membres pour pouvoir s'entretenir et s'entendre sur les différents aspects des produits qui pourraient être d'intérêt à tout le continent. De par ailleurs, le comité d'implémentation nationale supervise l'implémentation de la stratégie de la ZLECAf au niveau national. Parmi les différentes institutions qui peuvent faire part de ce comité, il y a bien sûr le ministère du Commerce. S'il y a un ministère de l'Industrie, il en va de même. Les services des douanes, le ministère des Finances et du Planning économique, un rôle particulier du secteur privé, ainsi qu'une certaine collaboration avec la population de manière générale et la société civile. Je dois aussi mentionner qu'au niveau de l'implémentation de la stratégie de la ZLECAf, nous avons fait une approche particulière à nos partenaires en développement de différentes institutions internationales pour aussi leur ouvrir et leur donner l'opportunité de participer. Au-delà du Comité national d'implémentation, je voudrais un peu insister sur la coordination qui se fait au niveau national, tant au secteur privé que dans la société civile. L'une des premières activités est de faire campagne, de pouvoir informer les gens de ce qui est en cours au niveau de la ZLECAf, mais surtout quel est l'alignement du pays. Si ce pays a choisi le textile, l'automobile électrique, pouvoir informer la population des différents choix nationaux pour qu'ils puissent comprendre quels sont les mécanismes et qu'ils puissent commencer à se préparer. Mais d'un autre côté, quand on parle de campagne, on pense au niveau des institutions, parce que l'implémentation de la ZLECAf met en place un travail considérable au niveau du service chargé des douanes et des taxes, avec toute une revue de la réglementation en place. Elle fait aussi part aux institutions chargées de l'informatique, l'ICT et la communication. Cela demande alors des consultations pour pouvoir voir comment positionner le pays. D'un autre côté, cela aussi engage des consultations au niveau national pour avoir des positions. En vous donnant un exemple simple, pour le secteur de l'automobile, il s'agit au niveau de chaque pays de voir quelle est la position que le pays voudrait prendre dans toute la chaîne de valeur du secteur automobile. Est-ce pour les pneus et la production des pneus? Est-ce pour la production des pièces de rechange? Est-ce pour les matériaux les matériaux qui sont nécessaires pour la production de ces pièces de rechange? Est-ce pour l'assemblage? Est-ce pour le véhicule lui-même? Est-ce pour le véhicule à essence et mazout? Ou est-ce pour le véhicule électrique? Est-ce pour les batteries? Ou pour les matières premières à la production des batteries? À ce moment, il s'agit de consultations dans les différents États membres pour que chacun puisse se positionner au niveau de la chaîne de valeur, tout en gardant à l'esprit que ces secteurs ont une immense opportunité pour le continent africain. Un autre aspect qui mentionne la coordination avec le secteur privé est que quand on parle de la ZLECAf et qu'on parle du commerce intra-africain, coûte que coûte, il y a le commerce en ligne. Le commerce en ligne est l'un des éléments clés qui va permettre aussi d'intensifier ce commerce intra-africain. Ainsi, toutes les fondations du digital dans le pays, ainsi que la formation des opérateurs du secteur privé en ce qui concerne le commerce en ligne, ainsi que tout le soutien technique qui est nécessaire, ainsi que plateformes et sécurité. Quand il s'agit de coordonner avec le secteur privé et la société civile, il vient aussi des normes de standards. Les normes de standards qui sont nécessaires parce que quand un pays veut commencer à commercialiser avec un autre, il faut que les produits soient alignés aux normes internationales, il faut qu'il y ait une reconnaissance mutuelle des standards, de manière qu'on évite une duplication des certifications des produits. Et finalement, au niveau de la coordination avec le secteur privé et la société civile, cela demande que dans le secteur privé, ils puissent se préparer à entrer dans une chaîne de valeur régionale, étant l'ultime objectif de la ZLECAf. Suivant. Je voudrais aborder en dernier lieu les bénéfices escomptés, bien qu'ils soient nombreux. Mais il y a certains que je voudrais ramener à l'attention de l'audience, parce que, en me rapportant au rapport de la Banque mondiale, ce qui est attendu de la ZLECAf, il est attendu que les revenus puissent croître de 450 millions de dollars une fois opérationnels, qu'il y ait une augmentation des emplois avec des opportunités, ainsi que des salaires pour ceux qui ne sont pas très formés, et ainsi aussi pouvoir avoir un effet particulier sur la balance du genre. Un autre aspect particulier nécessaire, c'est qu'en réduisant les tarifs aux douanes et en pouvant augmenter la compétition en exportation et en commerce, il est prévu que le commerce intra-africain, qui à son meilleur était à 18%, pourrait accroître à 50% d'ici 2035. Finalement, le secteur privé, le secrétariat de la ZLECAf a mis en place une stratégie pour le secteur privé en montrant les différents secteurs qui ont un gros potentiel dans les chaînes de valeur régionales et qui seraient bien intéressantes à être développées. La première, c'est le secteur de l'automobile, comme j'avais mentionné auparavant. Il y a le secteur de l'agroprocessing, en tenant en compte que beaucoup de biens agroalimentaires en Afrique ne sont pas suffisamment industrialisés ou manufacturisés. Il y a le secteur pharmaceutique, qui est un secteur à haut potentiel et dont la pandémie nous a permis à revoir son importance et même à s'engager davantage. Il y a le secteur de l'horticulture qui comprend tout le vert, que ce soit légumes ou fleurs, et qui a cette particularité en Afrique que cela peut même devenir bio. Et il y a de manière particulière l'industrialisation verte ou la technologie verte, en nous rappelant à l'esprit que l'Afrique a beaucoup d'opportunités pour se tourner vers le vert. Il est escompté que environ 11 milliards de dollars pourrait être une production additionnelle par année et 5 milliards de dollars être une addition au niveau intra-africain par an. Il est aussi escompté de pouvoir avoir 700 000 nouveaux emplois, avec la moitié ayant cette particularité à s'attacher aux jeunes et aux femmes. Il y a certains aspects que je n'ai pas mentionnés, mais qui sont déjà au Rwanda, en ce qui concerne le mouvement des personnes et des biens. où le Rwanda a mis en place la probabilité de pouvoir avoir un visa à arriver pour tous les habitants africains, mais aussi de pouvoir avoir un mouvement utilisé sur uniquement les cartes d'identité, ne fût-ce déjà au Kenya et en Ouganda. Il y a différents bénéfices au niveau industriel et au niveau informatique, mais je pense que, madame, je vais arrêter ici en vous remerciant pour votre attention.